All right, let's jump back into it once again for our third ABSC Town Hall Zoom meeting. This time it is anatomy of a swim practice here. And full disclosure, this was a live meeting originally with parents on the Zoom call with me. And the recording it was not a good recording at all. So I decided to re-record. And hopefully this time it'll be a lot more smooth, a lot less technical difficulties, and we'll go from there. But this time we're going to talk about the anatomy of a swim practice. And in particular, my goal here is to try to pull back the curtain and let you, the ABSC parents, take a look into what it's like to be a part of our swim practices on a day-to-day basis. And especially if you were a swimmer yourself or maybe a coach or something like that, you probably have a good idea of what you're looking at, but a lot of our parents don't. And they just see kids going back and forth up and down the pool without any context, really. Maybe a little bit of context, if they read the update email about what we're doing that day, but that week. But in general, they may not have a great idea. So hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a more informed group of not just parents, but even swimmers to have a better idea of what they're doing and why. So we'll dive right in. And sort of the overview is we're going to start with the theme of practice versus meets and sort of the value and quality of each. Then we'll talk about my mom's quote, she was a novice swim parent herself, learning swimming secondhand through me because she was never a swimmer. And so she had a pretty, I think, relatable quote when it came, or really a relatable question when it comes to swimming that I think maybe many of you have asked. We'll talk about the important theme of capacity training versus utilization training, which sounds like two random words, but it'll make sense shortly. Then we'll go into the overview of workouts group by group. I should also add that we'll probably talk about season periodization as well in the different parts of a season. From there, we'll go over components of a swim practice and what's actually happening in the practices on a day-to-day basis. We'll look at, this is probably the bulk of where our time is going to be, is we'll look at some sample workouts from all of our core groups so you can see what the coaches write down on our Google Docs when we write our workouts. From there, we'll talk about how to conquer the practice and then conquer the meets. We'll talk about what I encourage swimmers to do, which is sort of try to make a game out of practice in order to get the best out of yourself. And finally, we'll answer the question about whether or not practice should be easy, and we'll talk about the Goldilocks principle. So let's dive right in, and there's no better place to start than with my man, Alan Iverson here. And if you have seen this video on YouTube, you know exactly what this is. If you've never seen this before, if you didn't see it live, I would encourage you to go on YouTube and take a look. Just search Alan Iverson practice. And he gives one of the greatest rants of all time from an athlete at the podium after getting questioned by some reporters about his practice habits. So I won't go into the rant or the monologue myself, but just know in the spirit of Alan Iverson, we are talking about practice today. And if you have not seen this, you need to go take a look. It's pretty hilarious. So let's talk practice versus swim meets. Basically, a meet is like a recital. If your swimmer was a piano player, they practice, 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 put all that work in behind the scenes, and then they'll have a recital where the parents show up and the friends and family show up, and people get to watch them perform and see the music that they've learned. So swim meets are like that. They're like a recital. All the work happens behind the scenes at practice. By the time they show up at the meet, you're going to see the result of the work that they've put in. And of course, just like a recital, sometimes it goes perfect, sometimes it goes great, sometimes it's an accurate reflection of what they're doing in practice behind the scenes, and sometimes not at all. Sometimes they get a little nervous, maybe have a little bit of anxiety, maybe they just don't quite perform up to the level that the athlete would expect of themselves. Totally normal. That's why doing meets is important. The more meets you do, the more experience you get in the meet environment, the more likely your swimmer is to succeed. And meets are important for coaches. We love for swimmers to do meets because it gives us a lot of information and feedback. We get probably 90%, 95% of our information about swimmers from practice. But when they show up in meets and perform, that's when we get the rest and see, okay, what do we still need to work on? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? Where, what are they doing well and what are they not doing well? That we can go back to the practice pool and keep working on that. Practice, on the other hand, that's like the room where it happens, right? That's the magic is what happens in the practice pool. I think about Kirby Smart, being here in Athens, of course, and the UGA football team, and how all the UGA football players say that Kirby makes practice harder than the games, so that when the UGA football players show up to a game on Saturdays, it's easier than what they experienced in practice. In part because the players they play against in practice are really darn good. That's why the team is so good, but also because the coaches intentionally make practice a grind and challenging, and they put them in positions to make the athletes uncomfortable so that when they show up on game day, it's go time. And that's what we try to do with practice as well. So let's get to, I teased this earlier. This is my mom's question. So she was driving me home from practice one day and doing the typical mom question. So what did you guys do? What did you guys do in practice today? And I remember telling her something like, oh, we did, 20, 25, 100s freestyle was our main set. And her question was, why are you guys doing all that? Why are you swimming 25 100s of freestyle? When all your meets this year, you're a 200 butterflyer, that's your best event. You're an IMer. You don't swim any races that are 2,500 yards long. So why are you doing a set of 25 100s? What's the deal there? The question was, why don't you guys practice the races in practice? And she has a point. That's a great question. Why don't we practice the races in practice? Or at least, why don't we do it more? There's no one doing a set of 2050s on 10 seconds rest in a swim meet. Shouldn't we basically be doing rehearsals of what we do in practice in the meets? But see, here's the thing, swimming is not like other sports. You have to use practice to become more capable in the long run when it comes to swimming, right? So 2050s on 10 seconds rest isn't going to help necessarily your 100 free get better at the next swim meet, but it's going to add to your overall capacity to become a great swimmer over time. And that's why we do it. So that leads into the next phase of this conversation, which is capacity training versus utilization training. This is where I'm going to try to not let everybody's eyes gloss over, because these big words are a little bit unforeign, or are a little bit foreign and uncommon to the non-swim coach. So let me just break it down really simply. Utilization training, that's doing stuff that's going to exactly help you directly in a swim meet. So that would be something like doing starts, turns, and finishes. That would be something like specific practice races. The coach saying, okay, everybody get up on the block. We're going to do a 50 free for time. Or here comes a 200 butterfly for time. Swim it like you're going to swim it in the swim meet. Race strategy, race pace. That's utilization training. There's a little bit more to it than that. You could also say that there are some very specific types of swim sets that are sprint based that are more utilization training. So I'm definitely simplifying things down here, but just trying to paint a picture. The other end of it is capacity training. This is not necessarily going to directly help swimmers get better in a meet on specific races. Instead, it's going to help them in the long run. It's going to increase the likelihood that they can become fast. So capacity training would be doing more general sets and exercises that make you good at everything. For example, a set of 8 100s free, where they're only getting 5 or 10 seconds rest because the interval is really fast and keeps them moving. Or in general, just doing practices that are 5,000 yards long, when your swimmer might show up to a swim meet and all their events combined, even if they have a 500 free and a 200 IM, might only be 1,000 yards of total swimming in the meet that day, right? Or that weekend. So another way to think about it is capacity training. So increasing the likelihood that you'll get good is the base of your pyramid. Utilization works on the little design elements on the top of the pyramid to make it look good, right? The foundation is the capacity, the fine tuning is the utilization. Another way to think about it is every time you do utilization and training, it's like putting marbles in your cup, trying to fill your cup. It's one step closer to your goal. Every time you do capacity training, you're increasing the size of your cup, making your overall outlook as an athlete much better. Now, I didn't define those terms, capacity versus utilization. This comes from the world of swimming. I learned about it first from Michael Phelps's coach, Bob Bowman, not directly. He and I are not like buds or anything, but I learned it directly just by listening to him talk. And this is what he did a lot with Michael Phelps, was a lot of capacity training at a pretty young age to help him set the foundation for him to be the greatest swimmer of all time. So with that in mind, capacity versus utilization, let's take a look at some of the different workouts by group in terms of how much capacity they're going to do and how much utilization they're going to do. When a swimmer's younger, let's say they're 10 and under, 8 and under, they're going to do mostly utilization. In the middle groups, like the middle school ages, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, that sort of thing, ninth grade, they're going to do a ton of capacity training. Like that is those middle school years and early high school is when you got to hit it hard with the capacity training. You just layer it on yards and yards and yards and lots of training. The oldest groups, like our three senior groups, senior one, senior two, senior flex, they're going to do a lot of both, particularly senior one, which is why they practice so much. Some of their workouts are more capacity, some are more utilization, and so on. So an easy way to think about it is with the GUPS group, our youngest, most intro group, they're probably 50-50 of capacity and utilization. They might do a set of 10-25s kick, and then the rest of practice, they're working on flip turns or they're doing practice races, right? The pups are more 60-40, leaning slightly towards the capacity. Super pups even more, probably 70% capacity. And the dogs group, which is kind of our top 14 and under, 15, like middle school, early high school group, they're doing a ton of capacity, like at least 80%, maybe more of capacity training, just trying to increase their ability to get good over time. Then you get to the senior groups and it sort of switches backwards a little bit, almost more like 60-40 by the time you're in a senior group. So next, we're going to talk about season periodization because yes, capacity and utilization, I gave you those figures, the 50-50, the 60-40, the 70-30. Those are generalizations over the course of the season. Let's think about older groups for a little bit. Let's think about more super pups, even more so dogs, even more so seniors. They're going to have season periodization. What this means is you're not doing the same thing in September that you're doing in December, that you're doing in March. Those are three distinct phases of the season where very different things are happening in a practice. For example, the short course season that we are in this year, the 2022-2023 season, started the very last week of August, and it goes all the way till the divisionals meet, which I think is like the 25th of March. That's sort of our last big hurrah, our grand finale swim meet. That's 30 weeks from the time we start until the time we hit divisionals. Over those 30 weeks, I'm going to go through this from the lens of super pups because that's the group I coach, but I can tell you that dogs and seniors follow a similar pattern to this, if not exactly the same. Over the course of those 30 weeks, we break it down into season phases. So first, the first 6 weeks of the season is your teaching and foundation phase. And for here, you're going to think about like a football team, for example, maybe in like spring camp or in the summertime, kind of like before you get into the real grit of the fall practices. What are they doing? They're learning drills, they're learning the playbook, they're installing the offense, maybe players are switching positions and trying out new positions, things like that. That's what's happening here in the teaching and foundation phase. I, as the swim coach, am just reminding these swimmers after a few weeks off that they do still know how to swim. And beyond that, we're getting them back in shape a little bit, doing some kind of basic conditioning, like a lot of kicking. But we're installing drills and we're installing technique points and we're installing terminology. I'm teaching them the things that I'm going to look for that season and making sure they have the basics right before we get into the real training. And that's really the first 6 weeks of the season. The swimmers don't usually think it's very hard. We don't really jump up in intensity very much. The practices don't get too intense at that point in the season. It's just sort of laying the groundwork. The next 12 weeks would be our aerobic buildup phase. That's actually at the time that I'm recording this now, we're nearing the end of I'm in December, right? We're in December. We're nearing the end of the aerobic buildup phase. So that lasts for 12 weeks. And each week, my group, the Super Pups, I'll show you on my season plan in a minute, we get harder, more challenging the practices in terms of overall distance by about 100-ish yards per week. And we just build up the intensity and build up and build up and build up the distance over time so that by the end of these 12 weeks, these swimmers have put in some serious work. They have worked really, really hard. The next 6 weeks after that, we're talking early January and February, swimmers are in the quality phase. And practices are still hard during the quality phase. It doesn't change a lot. The big difference is in the aerobic phase, they're doing a lot of swimming on not very much rest. In the quality phase, they're doing slightly less swimming. The distance is a little shorter, but you want it to be more race pace. You want it to be higher quality, more perfect. And so we give them more rest in between swims during this phase so their body can recover and they can swim at a higher speed for shorter distances. Finally, you hit the sharpening phase. the final 6 weeks of the season. And this is where, again, still challenging, at least up until the last week or two before divisionals, where we really kind of taper it down a little bit, cut it down a little bit. But up until the last couple of weeks there during the sharpening phase, they're still working, they're still swimming fast, they're still swimming quality, but they're doing a lot more starts, turns, finishes, focusing on little technique points like nailing their breathing and nailing their breakouts and just trying to make their swim as recital ready as possible. So here's a look at my Super Pup season plan, for example. And what we've got here is a spreadsheet. And within this spreadsheet, I've got a list of every week of the season, starting August 29th when we first got in the water. That's up here in that second column, all the way down here as we keep on rolling to the divisionals meet on the week of March 20 to 24th. I think the meet is that weekend, right? So that is the full season plan for short course. And then we'll take a week. We'll do a fun week. After that, we'll take spring break and then we'll start the long course season, right? So you see the first 6 weeks, season plan phase, teaching and foundation. Their yardage is low, right? They're doing no more than 2,000 yards in a practice on the A group, no more than 1,600 yards on the B group. And we have a free intro week, a back week, a breast week, a fly week, a free review, and then a whatever we need review before we start building up. The next 12 weeks, what we're in currently is the aerobic buildup phase right here. And you can see where I've put check marks. Those are the weeks that I've completed at the time of this recording. So I'm on week 16, which would be the 10th week of the aerobic buildup phase. So we're nearing the end. And actually, yesterday or 2 days ago, at the time of my recording this, we just did our hardest practice of the season. The A group did a practice that was 3,500 yards long. The B group did a practice that was 2,800 yards long. So that was the longest practice of the season that we are at currently. After this, we'll continue our aerobic building into the next 2 weeks, which will actually be our Christmas training schedule. And once we come back from Christmas training, then it's the quality phase for 6 weeks. We finish there with the sharpening phase for 6 weeks. You can see over here on the side that the yardage gets lower and lower until right before divisionals. And this is when I want my athletes hitting their peak performance is at this divisionals meet. Last year at the divisionals meet, my group had roughly 70% personal best times, which is really, really good for us. That's a really awesome number. And, some of that's skewed, but a lot of kids were going 100% personal best times. ABSC also won the divisionals meet, which is a huge goal of ours, and we're going to hope to do that again. We had lots of swimmers at finals, all that kind of stuff. So we really plan the whole season so that they peak at divisionals. All right, let's jump right back into it. So let's talk about now on a micro level, not season plan anymore, just a micro level. What are the basic components of a swim practice? So first of all, most days they're going to come in and I'm talking older groups here. Younger groups don't really do a warm up like GUPS and PUPs, but supers and up, super pups, dogs, the senior groups, they're going to come in and start with a warm up. And I'll show you all an example of that in a minute. Then they might have some technique progressions. They might do some isolation sets. So technique progressions would be like drills, working on specific technique points for any of the 4 strokes. Isolation sets, maybe they're doing a kick set, maybe they're doing a pull set, maybe they're doing something with fins or with snorkel. They're isolating a certain part of their body and focusing on that. There's also skill sets or skill progressions. So this would be like teaching dives or teaching flip turns or teaching underwater dolphin kicking, some sort of racing skill. Then you've got capacity sets, which as I laid out earlier, those are your really hard, really long sets where you're trying to just build their aerobic capacity, basically. And we do a lot of those in the dogs and the seniors. And capacity sets can be aerobic or anaerobic. So there are definitely anaerobic or sprint-based capacity sets, to be sure. Then you've got what many coaches call test sets. I call it a progress set. But that's basically where you do the same set maybe once a month or something like that, and you make it harder each time you do it and see if the athletes can keep getting better at it. For example, in the Super Pups, they might have a set of 8 100s freestyle, and in September when they did it, the time interval they had to make on all 8 100s was 1:45. In October, it dropped down to 1:40. In November, it dropped down to 1:35. Here in December, it's down to 1:30. So it keeps getting faster each month, and they have to see if they can complete those 100s on the interval progress set. we'll jump from there. So let's dive into some example workouts here, and this will probably be where we camp out for a few minutes. So first of all, you've got the GUPS example. Let's see, I might need to get out of my, there we go. This is a sample GUPS practice, our youngest group, okay, our GUPS group. Now, what you see, we have a chart here at the top of the page that goes over what they're going to do each day. You see this is from week 7 in October of the season. And so let's look at our Monday practice here for the GUPS. So you see their stroke focus is breaststroke kick, trying to make it narrow. And for those that are not legal in the swim meet, trying to get their kick to be swim meet ready. The skill focus is there's a diving progression where we work on diving, fingers first and being able to do a racing start. We've got some practice habits that we work on. So the A group, the faster group, is working on breaststroke pullouts. The other group is working on making sure they do 2-hand touches. And then we've got at the end of their breaststroke lap to make sure they don't get disqualified. And then there's some fun at the end. We have a cannonball contest at the very end. So as you look at this, the GUPS start with warm up, but it's not really a warm up in the traditional sense. They're basically doing a kick set, right? They're doing 425s kick, and they're doing a couple of 50s where they go IM swim, basically. And you see we've got an A interval. Most of the ABSC groups actually have this where there's a faster version of the set and a not as fast version of the set, right? So you got your A interval and your B interval. After they do their little kick warm up, you've got a set where they're working for about 30 or 35 minutes on breaststroke kicking. And they've got some key technique points here that Coach Maddie, the GUPS coach, has written out. And then they're actually going to do their 25s of breaststroke kick and their breaststroke swim. And then assuming they've got time, they're going to go over working on pullouts when they push off the wall. And they finish practice with a dry land progression. At the end, they have their fun cannonball jumps, and then we go from there. The GUPS also have dry land. It looks like on dry land that day they worked on planks and crunches, and they did a leapfrog relay. So good times there in the GUPS group. As we take it up to the PUPS group now and look at their sample practice, very similar. This is from a PUPS practice in November. Got the same looking chart going on here that the GUPS have, right? And we have who's broken down on the A and B interval. Now, as we scroll down and look at this Monday practice, it was a fly week, a butterfly focus week for them. So they're working on butterfly body position as their main technique point. Their skill focus was IM turns, like butterfly to backstroke transition turns, for example. Their next set is a progress, or their habit. They actually did a progress set instead of a traditional habit that day. And their challenge was beating a time, where we will have them swim once, try it again, and swim again. So you can see A interval, B interval, the two halves here. A did 650s as their kick set. B did 550s as their kick set. Next, they jumped into some butterfly body position work. And you see some 25s there doing a drill progression here where they started with body dolphin drill. Then they did hand lead body dolphin. Then they did something called stone skipper drill. After they did their drills, they jumped into actual butterfly swim. Then their skill focus kicked in, and we worked on teaching butterfly to backstroke transition turns. And we did some 25s where they actually got to practice those. And then finally, they did their challenge at the end where they did 2 25s of freestyle, one from a push, meaning pushing off the wall, one from a dive. And on the one from a dive, they had to beat their time that they did on the one from a push. And they have their dry land there at the end. Let's take it up a notch here, and we will go now looking at the Super Pups example practice. So this is from early October. This would be sort of the beginning of the aerobic buildup phase that the supers are in. And oh, nope, it looks like the final week actually of the teaching and foundation phase is what this was. So here's their early season practice. And we'll look at let's look at Tuesday. They're at Ramsey on Tuesday. So you see the major focus that day was backstroke head position and rotation. The minor focus was I was teaching them how to use a snorkel, and I was teaching them drop unders, which is an important part. This is the installation part of it, right? How you start a swim. You drop under off the wall and go. It's actually the beginnings of how you teach turns, open turns. And then their skill focus was backstroke flip turns. So you see they've got a warm-up of the month. A interval, B interval, that's what they start with is their warm-up of the month, about 600 yards on the A group. After they finish their warm-up of the month, we go into the skill focus, which was their backstroke flip turns, right? So we started by solidifying their stroke count, making them do some backstroke finishes, and then we took the next step and put it into flip turns. And that's about 450 yards of swimming what they did there. The next set they did was a backstroke head position and rotation set. So they did 10 50s on a minute 15 backstroke on the A interval, 5 single arm, 5 swim, focusing on their head being still and their body rotating. There's that major technique point they were working on. After their 10 50s, they did 10 25s, 5 barrel roll drill, which is another drill that works on head position, and 5 fast swim. You see the B interval was a similar set, but just not quite as long. Then they finished the practice with their minor focus, which was if they already knew how to use a snorkel, they worked on reviewing their drop unders. If they were still learning how to use their snorkel, they worked on that. So there's your Super Pups practice. Again, this was only 2,000 yards, even in an hour and a half practice, because it's their early season teaching and foundation phase. So we really take our time in that phase. We work on getting everything right and repeating it if it's wrong and making sure that it's right. So that's what's happening there. Now let's take a jump here. And just so you know, like looking at my Super Pup season plan, we jump up all the way to 3,500 yards or more. So we get pretty high in the yardage on the Super Pups, a lot more than 2,000 at least. Now, dogs practice. We're winding down here. I'm about to hit my last couple points. Dogs practice. This is a set from sort of the mid-season of the dogs. You see they start with a 400 choice. Then they go 4 times through their little warm-up kick set, basically. Kick and swim set. They go 250s kick with a board, 1 fly, 1 free. They go 25 free, 6 kick switch, head up, full extension. Then they go a 25 freestyle pull, and they work through that 4 times for 600 yards. So they're at 1,000 yards after the 400 warm up and the 600. Then they go two times through sort of a freestyle and butterfly / underwater dolphin kicking set. And they finish by going 3 times through sort of their main like racing set of the day, where they do a 450s with fins on. The first 25 is fast fly. The second 25 is easy free. Then they go 100 fast IM, where they kick the back and breast and swim the fly and free. And then they go a 200 IM strong off the blocks. And it's 3 times through all that. So you see this workout, including warm up and cool down, is 4,300 yards. You see a lot more capacity stuff right here. Like, yes, they are doing some racing swims, but it's a more aerobic, endurance-based workout, at least than what we've seen so far. Finally, we're going to look at a senior 1 sample practice here. This is our top competitive group. This practice is from October 18th, 2022. And you see that it is a PM, means it's an afternoon practice. Sometimes they have morning. You see it's an IM/PS. PS is prime stroke workout. And it's 6,600 yards, 6.6K. All right. So looking at this practice, they start with an 800 reverse IM, RIMO, reverse IM order. So they're going to go 50. So basically a 200 of each stroke, starting with freestyle, then breast, then back, then fly. And for each 200, they go 50 kick, 100 drill, 50 B is build. All right. After that, they're going to go a set of 25s. Then they go a 600 backstroke pull, right? There's your capacity stuff right there. After that, they're doing sort of their warm-up set, which is variables. That's where they do like half fast, half easy. It's basically a preset or a warm-up set. From there, they're going a 400 with fins, doing some breast and fly and underwater dolphin kicking. They're going a couple hundreds free. They're going a 200 free with underwaters. They're doing some more race pace stuff, and then they're doing a 400 stretch out, a long, smooth swim. After they do that, you get into the actual main set for the day, which is 8 200s. So you see the yardage really starts to add up in some of these groups, right? So the 6.6K, 6,600 yard practice, that's not the most they'll do. They'll do more than that sometimes, but that's definitely, I would say, a fair average representation of what they do on a daily basis in practice. So there's our sample practices. And now we're nearing the end of our presentation, so I'll wind it down with just a couple last few pieces of advice. I'm actually going to move my Goldilocks. There we go. Let's do this one now. So looking at all those sample practices, that sort of begs the question, should practice be easier or should it be easy? Should it be hard? What do we want? And what we want is the Goldilocks principle. You want swimmers to be in the range where they are just pushing the edge of their comfort zone. If it's too easy, they're not getting better. If it's too hard, they're going to be demotivated and they're not going to want to come back. So you want to hit that perfect zone right on the edge, just pushing the boundary of their comfort zone. When it starts to get too easy, they probably need to move up to the next practice group, right? That's usually a pretty good indicator. But to make sure that we've got the Goldilocks thing going on, that's why we have, even within like a super pups or a dogs practice, there's usually an A version of the set and a B version of the set, a harder version and a not as hard version, to try to diversify a little bit what's happening in there and making sure different needs are met. Once it does get easy, we're going to move swimmers up. We try to teach swimmers to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's not okay to be like exhausted and hating everything. And then if it is too much, if it is too hard, we encourage swimmers to communicate with us. We want to know because there's ways we can modify and try to take care of them. We don't want swimmers to get overwhelmed. We don't want swimmers to get frustrated. We don't want swimmers to quit. It's important they communicate with us, right? That's a big deal. They got to let us know how they're feeling. We try to watch out too, but they got to let us know. So to end with a couple pieces of advice here, I try to say two things. Number one, conquer practices first. Conquer practice, then conquer meets. If you can conquer practice, meets will be a piece of cake. That's what we want. We want the UGA football principle here. Practice is meant to be harder than the games. Practice, is meant to be harder than the swim meets. Some ways you can conquer the practice. Number one, swim at the front of your lane. Be one of the first couple swimmers in practice at the front of the lane. If you're chilling at the back of the lane, you're probably, this isn't always true, but a lot of times swimmers at the back of the lane are kind of floating through practice that day, letting everybody else go first. You want to be towards the front of the lane. The obvious exception to this is if you're, maybe swimming up to a new group for the first time, or you usually swim on the B interval, but you're trying to do it on the A interval, and everyone's just faster than you, and you have no choice but to go to the back of the lane, right? That happens sometimes. Next thing you can do is if the coach gives you the choice of doing the harder version or the not as hard version, we don't always give the choice, but if we give you the choice, here's the harder version. Conquer that one, right? If the coach puts you on the B interval, the not as hard version, focus on conquering that. Make it look as easy as possible and give us no choice but to move you to the harder one, right? And finally, make all of the sets or as many of them as you can. Don't pick and choose when you want to be fast. Try to dominate it. Think about, okay, I'm not going to use all my energy in warm up here because warm up, there's nothing to lose. I'm going to save a little bit of my energy and put it towards the progress set or the hardest set in practice so that I'm ready to roll once that rolls around. I tell kids the only way to fail is to give up or to not try. It's the only way to fail. Give up or don't try. And finally, I try to encourage kids to gamify their practices a little bit. Challenge yourself to dominate the hardest set. Identify what the hardest set is going to be that day and make that one the one that you want to kick butt on. Rate your performance day by day. Give yourself a grade, 1 to 5, F to A. How did you do that day? And try to be a little better next time. Keep a journal of what you did in practice and track your progress. Did you make the progress sets? Are you on the fastest interval? Are you having success? At what points do you start to get tired and fail? When can you bring a water bottle or a bigger water bottle or a Gatorade to help you be more effective? All different ways to try to strategize and gamify the practice a little bit. Treat it like a video game and you're trying to level up. So that's going to do it for our presentation here, the 4th Town Hall Zoom Anatomy of a Swim Practice. I hope it was helpful. I hope it's encouraging. And as always, go Dogs.